Imagine a bright, sunny Saturday morning. The sky is blue, the sun is shining, and everything feels happy and calm. In a small, quiet neighborhood, kids are running around, laughing and playing games. Birds are singing pretty songs from the trees. It's the kind of day where nothing seems to go wrong. Everything looks normal, well, almost everything. That's when you meet Jake Miller. Jake is the new guy on Oak Street. He just moved into a little house with a red door and a tiny front yard. He seems like a regular person. He's not super tall or super loud. He's just Jake. He wears a plain blue shirt and old sneakers, and he's always got a big, goofy smile on his face. But Jake isn't alone. He's got a dog named Max. Max is big, like, really big. His fur is a mix of black and brown, and his tail wags like a windshield wiper on a rainy day. Max is loud, too. When he barks, you can hear it from 3 houses away. But Max is a good dog. He's friendly and silly, and he never hurts anyone. Most people in the neighborhood like him. When Jake walks Max down the street, folks wave and say, "Hey, Jake. Hey, Max." Kids run over to pet Max, and he licks their hands like they're his best friends. So, yeah, Jake and Max seem pretty normal. Just a guy and his dog, living their life. That's what everyone thinks, at least, most people. But there's one person who doesn't like Jake. Not even a little bit. Her name is Karen Peterson. Karen is the boss of the neighborhood. She's the president of something called the HOA. That's a group that makes rules for everyone to follow. Karen loves rules more than anything. She walks around with a clipboard stuck to her hand like it's part of her arm. She's got a list of things you can and can't do, like how tall your grass can grow or what color your mailbox has to be. If you break one of her rules, oh boy, watch out. She'll give you a look so mean it could scare a grizzly bear right out of the woods. Karen has short, gray hair and wears bright red glasses that sit on the end of her nose. She's always frowning, like she just ate a sour lemon. And when she saw Jake move in with Max, her frown got even bigger. She didn't wave or smile like the other neighbors. Nope. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, staring at Jake like he was a bug she wanted to squish. She decided right then and there that Jake didn't belong on Oak Street. Why? She didn't like Max. She thought he was too loud, too big, too everything. And Jake? Well, she thought he was trouble just because he owned that dog. It didn't matter that Jake was nice. It didn't matter that Max never bit anyone or broke anything. Karen had made up her mind. She watched Jake every day, waiting for him to mess up. If Max barked too much, she'd write it down on her clipboard. If Jake parked his truck a little crooked, she'd shake her head and mutter to herself. She even told the other neighbors, "That dog is a problem. And that Jake guy? He doesn't fit here." Some people listened to her because they didn't want trouble. Others just shrugged and kept waving at Jake anyway. But here's the funny thing, Jake didn't seem to care. When Karen glared at him, he'd just smile and say, "Good morning, Karen." When Max barked, Jake would laugh and pat his head. He didn't argue or get mad. He just kept being himself. And that made Karen even madder. She thought Jake was weak. She thought he'd give up and move away if she kept pushing him. Oh, she had no idea what was coming. Jake wasn't who she thought he was. And Max? Max was more special than anyone knew. So, let me ask you something, have you ever had a neighbor who wouldn't leave you alone? Maybe someone who complained about every little thing you did? Like, if you left your bike in the yard or played music too loud? I bet some of you are nodding right now. Well, stick with me, because Jake's about to show us all how to deal with someone like that. This story's just getting started, and trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Let's paint the picture a little more. Oak Street is a cozy place. The houses are small, with neat little yards and flower boxes under the windows. There's a big oak tree at the end of the road. That's how the street got its name. Kids ride their bikes up and down the sidewalk, and old Mr. Thompson sits on his porch every day, sipping lemonade and waving at everyone. It's the kind of place where people know each other's names. Jake picked this street because it felt friendly. He wanted a quiet spot to live with Max after moving from the city. He wasn't looking for trouble. He just wanted a home. But Karen? She saw Jake as a big problem. The first day he moved in, She marched over with her clipboard and said, "I hope you know the rules around here." Jake nodded and said, "Sure do." She didn't like that he wasn't scared of her. Most people got nervous when Karen started talking about rules. Not Jake. He just kept smiling, and Max wagged his tail like it was all a game. That's when Karen decided she'd make life hard for him. She didn't know it yet, but she was picking a fight with the wrong guy and the wrong dog. Think about this for a second. What would you do if someone like Karen lived next to you? Would you try to be nice, like Jake? Or would you get mad and yell back? Jake's way is pretty cool, right? He doesn't let her get to him. He's chill, like a superhero who doesn't need to show off. But don't worry, the story's got some surprises up ahead. Karen thinks she's in charge, but Jake's got a secret. And Max? He's not just a loud, goofy dog. There's more to him than meets the eye. So, here we are, on a sunny Saturday, with Jake and Max settling into their new home. The neighborhood's buzzing with its usual sounds: kids laughing, birds chirping, a lawnmower humming somewhere down the street. Everything seems normal. But something big is brewing. Karen's watching from her window, planning her next move. And Jake? He's just waiting. He's got a trick up his sleeve that's going to turn everything upside down. Want to know what it is? Keep listening, because this is where the fun really starts. Okay, let's dive into the next part of this crazy story. Things are about to heat up on Oak Street. It all started small, really small. Karen, the grumpy HOA boss with her clipboard, didn't waste any time making Jake's life tricky. One day, she marched right over to Jake's little house. Her shoes clicked loud on the sidewalk, and her face looked like she'd just smelled something stinky. She stopped in Jake's yard and pointed at the ground. There were muddy paw prints everywhere, Max's paw prints. Max had been playing outside, digging in the dirt like dogs do, and his big feet left messy marks. Karen acted like those paw prints were the worst thing ever. She stuck her finger out and yelled, "Dogs like that don't belong here." Her voice was so loud, it bounced off the houses. Everyone on Oak Street could hear her kids playing, old Mr. Thompson on his porch, even the birds in the trees. She stood there with her arms crossed, glaring at Jake like he'd broken every rule in her book. Jake was outside, holding a broom to sweep up the mess. He didn't yell back or frown. Nope. He just nodded, calm as could be, and said, "Okay, I'll clean it up." Then he started sweeping, nice and slow, while Max sat next to him, wagging his tail. Karen stomped away, but she wasn't done, not even close. She thought Jake was easy to boss around because he didn't fight back. Oh boy, was she wrong. The next day, she wrote him a mean note. It said, "Your dog barks too much. It's annoying everyone. Make him stop." She slipped it under Jake's door when he wasn't home. Max barks sometimes, sure, he's a dog. But it wasn't loud enough to bother most people. Still, Karen acted like it was the end of the world. Then, a few days later, she sent another note. This one was about Jake's truck. It's an old blue truck, nothing fancy, but Karen wrote, "Your truck is too loud. Park it somewhere else." Jake read the notes, scratched his head, and just smiled. He didn't get mad. He didn't write back. He just kept doing his thing. The neighbors started to notice all this. Some of them liked Karen because she kept the street perfect with her rules. So when she complained about Jake, they started whispering. "Maybe he is trouble," one lady said while watering her flowers. "That dog's pretty loud," a guy mumbled as he walked by. Others didn't care, they still waved at Jake and petted Max. But Karen's words were like little seeds. They made some people look at Jake differently, like he was a problem they didn't want around. She wanted everyone to think Jake was a bad neighbor, someone who didn't belong on their quiet little street. Here's the thing, though, Jake didn't let it get to him. Not yet. Every time Karen glared or left a note, he'd just smile and wave. "Morning, Karen," he'd call out, like they were friends. Max would wag his big tail, too, happy as ever. Jake kept his cool, even when Karen stood on her porch, watching him like a hawk. She'd scribble stuff on her clipboard, probably more complaints about him and Max. She thought she had Jake all figured out. In her mind, he was just some quiet guy she could push around. She thought he'd give up, pack his bags, and leave Oak Street for good. She was so sure of herself, standing there with her red glasses and her mean frown. But Jake? He wasn't mad, not even a little bit. He didn't yell or argue. He didn't stomp over to Karen's house and tell her to stop. He just kept living his life. He'd walk Max down the street, whistling a happy tune. He'd fix up his yard or sit on his porch with a glass of water, watching the kids play. It was like Karen's mean words bounced right off him. And that drove her nuts. The madder she got, the calmer Jake stayed. It was almost funny, like a game where she kept trying to win, but he wasn't even playing. Let's talk about Max for a second. Max is a big dog, right? His bark is deep and loud, like a drum. But he's so friendly. When kids ran up to him, he'd flop on the ground and let them rub his belly. When Jake threw a ball, Max would chase it, tripping over his own paws like a goofy clown. Sure, he made some noise, but he wasn't a bad dog. Karen didn't see it that way. To her, Max was a monster, a big, loud problem ruining her perfect neighborhood. And since Max was Jake's dog, that made Jake a problem, too. One afternoon, Karen took it up a notch. She saw Jake's truck parked in front of his house. It wasn't even loud that day, it was just sitting there. But she marched over anyway, banging on Jake's door. "Move that noisy thing," she shouted. Jake opened the door, still holding his broom from cleaning. "It's not running, Karen," he said, nice and polite. She huffed, turned red, and stormed off. Jake just shrugged and went back inside. The neighbors peeked out their windows, wondering what was going on. Some started thinking Karen was right, maybe Jake was trouble. But others, they saw how calm he was and started wondering why Karen cared so much. Here's where it gets good. Jake wasn't mad yet, but you could tell he was watching. His eyes had a little spark, like he knew something Karen didn't. He wasn't just some guy she could scare away. He had a plan, or maybe a secret. And Max? That big, goofy dog might have been part of it. Karen thought she was winning, but she was digging herself into a big mess. She had no clue what Jake was hiding. What do you think it could be? A secret job? A trick up his sleeve? Something about Max? Stick around, because this story's about to get wild. Alright, let's keep this story rolling. Weeks went by on Oak Street, and things started getting crazier. Karen, the grumpy HOA boss with her clipboard, wasn't slowing down. She got meaner and louder every day. She watched Jake and Max like a hawk, waiting for something, anything she could complain about. And then, one day, she hit the jackpot. She caught Max howling on Jake's roof. Yep, you heard that right, Max, the big goofy dog, was up on the roof. How did he get there? Well, Jake had built a little ramp. It was just some wood nailed together, leaning from the backyard up to the roof. Nothing fancy, but it worked. Max loved it. He'd climb up that ramp, sit on the roof, and watch the world go by. His big tail would thump against the shingles, and sometimes he'd let out a loud howl just for fun. It was weird, sure. Most dogs don't hang out on roofs. But it made Max happy, and Jake thought it was pretty cool. He'd sit in the yard, look up at Max, and laugh. "Good boy, Max," he'd say, tossing him a treat. But Karen? Oh, she didn't think it was cool at all. To her, it was like Max broke every rule in the world. One sunny afternoon, she looked out her window and saw him up there, howling away. Her eyes got big, her face turned red, and she lost it. She stormed out of her house, her shoes stomping so hard you'd think the ground would crack. She marched right up to Jake's yard, screaming, "This is a disgrace. A dog on the roof. I'm calling the cops." Her voice was so loud, birds flew out of the trees. She pointed at Max like he was a monster, her hands shaking with anger. Jake was in the yard, holding a rake. He'd been cleaning up leaves, nice and calm. When Karen yelled, he didn't jump or shout back. Nope. He just looked at her, shrugged his shoulders, and said, "Go ahead." That was it, just two little words. He didn't sound mad or scared. He didn't even stop raking. He just kept going, slow and steady, while Max howled again from the roof. Karen blinked, like she couldn't believe it. She expected Jake to beg her to stop or say sorry. But he didn't. He acted like it was no big deal. The neighbors heard all the yelling and peeked out their windows. Old Mr. Thompson put down his lemonade and leaned forward on his porch. Kids stopped riding their bikes and stared. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Karen pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. Hello? Yes, there's a dangerous animal on a roof, she shouted into the phone. It's howling and scaring everyone. Send help now. Her voice was loud and wobbly, like she was about to cry. She kept glaring at Jake, waiting for him to panic. But Jake? He didn't move. He just stood there, petting Max's head when the dog climbed back down the ramp. Max wagged his tail and licked Jake's hand, happy as ever. Jake scratched behind Max's ears and smiled a little smile, like he knew something funny. That's when you start to wonder, why isn't he worried? Most people would freak out if someone called the cops on them. They'd yell or run or try to explain. But not Jake. He was calm, too calm. It was like he wasn't scared of Karen or the police or anything. Something about the way he stood there, so quiet and sure, made you think he had a trick up his sleeve. What was he up to? Let's back up a bit. Those weeks before the roof drama, Karen had been getting bolder every day. She'd walk by Jake's house all the time, looking for trouble. One day, she saw Max digging in the yard and wrote Jake another nasty note, "Control your dog." The next day, she complained his grass was too long even though it looked fine. She even told the neighbors, "That Jake guy is ruining our street." Some people started nodding, like maybe she was right. Others just rolled their eyes and kept petting Max when he walked by. But Karen didn't care what anyone thought. She was on a mission to make Jake leave. And now, with Max on the roof, she thought she'd won. She thought calling 911 would finally scare Jake away. She stood there in his yard, holding her phone, smirking like she'd caught him doing something awful. The neighbors whispered to each other. "A dog on the roof? That's weird," one lady said. "Karen's gonna get him in big trouble," a kid whispered back. Everyone waited, holding their breath. They thought the police would show up, lights flashing, and drag Jake and Max away. But Jake didn't look nervous. Not even a little. He leaned on his rake and watched Karen like she was putting on a silly show. Max sat next to him, panting and wagging his tail. The sun was shining, the birds were back to singing, and Jake acted like it was just another normal day. That quiet confidence of his, it was strange. It made you wonder what he knew that Karen didn't. Was he hiding something? Did Max have a secret? Why was he so okay with the cops coming? Think about it, if someone called 911 on you, would you be scared? I bet most of us would. We'd worry about getting in trouble or looking bad in front of everyone. But Jake wasn't like that. He didn't run inside or try to hide Max. He didn't even argue with Karen. He just said, "Go ahead, and let her do her thing." That's not normal, right? It's like he wanted her to call. Like he was waiting for it. What's going on in his head? Karen finished her call and put her phone away. "You'll see," she snapped at Jake. "They'll take that dog away, and you'll be sorry." She crossed her arms and stood there, waiting for the sirens. The neighbors kept watching, some of them excited, some of them confused. Jake didn't say a word. He just patted Max's head and waited, too. The air felt thick, like something big was about to happen. You could almost hear the clock ticking, tick, tock, tick, tock. So, what do you think? Why isn't Jake worried? Is he just super brave, or does he know something we don't? Maybe Max isn't just a regular dog. Maybe Jake's got a plan. This story's getting good, right? Stay with me, because what happens next is gonna blow your mind. Karen thinks she's in charge, but she's about to find out she's not the boss of the street. Jake's got something up his sleeve, and it's gonna be awesome. Keep listening, you won't believe where this goes. Okay, here we go. This is the part where everything explodes into awesomeness. Minutes after Karen called 911, the whole street heard it, sirens. Loud, screaming sirens coming closer and closer. Everyone on Oak Street froze. Kids dropped their bikes, neighbors stuck their heads out windows, and old Mr. Thompson stood up from his porch chair. Karen smirked, crossing her arms like she'd won a big prize. She thought the police were coming to take Jake and Max away. She was so sure of it, standing there with her clipboard, waiting to say, "I told you so." But then, something crazy happened. Around the corner came a big, shiny red fire truck, not a police car. The sirens were loud, and the truck's lights flashed red and white, lighting up the whole street. It rolled right up to Jake's house and stopped with a big whoosh. Karen's jaw dropped literally. Her mouth hung open like she'd seen a ghost. 3 firefighters jumped out of the truck, all wearing their big yellow coats and helmets. They weren't mad or serious. Nope, they were grinning, big happy smiles on their faces. One of them, a tall guy with a loud voice, waved and shouted, "Hey, Jake. Max giving you trouble again." The other 2 firefighters laughed, slapping their knees like it was the funniest thing ever. Karen blinked fast, her eyes darting around. "Wait, what's going on?" she stammered, her voice all shaky. She looked at the fire truck, then at Jake, then back at the truck. She was so confused, her clipboard almost fell out of her hands. The neighbors started whispering, leaning out their windows even more. Kids ran closer, pointing at the truck. "Firefighters! Here," one yelled. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. Jake stepped forward, calm as ever. He had a little smirk on his face, not a mean one, just a sneaky one, like he'd been waiting for this moment. He looked at Karen and said, "Oh, didn't I mention? I'm a firefighter." "Yep, that's right." Jake wasn't just some regular guy with a loud dog. He was a real-life firefighter. He pointed at the 3 guys in yellow coats. "These guys are my crew," he said. "We work together at the fire station." Then he patted Max, who was still sitting on the roof, wagging his big tail. "And Max? He's our station mascot. He's trained to howl when there's an emergency." The firefighters burst out laughing again. "Good old Max," one said, wiping his eyes. "He's the best dog we've got." Max barked, loud and proud, like he knew they were talking about him. His howl echoed down the street, and the kids cheered. Karen's face? It turned redder than the fire truck. Her cheeks puffed up, her eyes got wide, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. She'd called 911 because she thought Max was dangerous. She wanted the police to come and take him away. But instead, she got Jake's firefighter buddies, his friends. How's that for a twist? Let's rewind a tiny bit so you get the full picture. Karen had been so sure she was right. She'd yelled about Max being a dangerous animal on the roof, thinking Jake was just some troublemaker. She thought the sirens meant she'd won, that help was coming to fix her problem. But when that fire truck pulled up, everything flipped upside down. The firefighters weren't there to arrest Jake or scold him. They were there because they knew him. They worked with him every day. And Max? He wasn't just some loud dog. He was a hero dog, trained to help save people. The tall firefighter walked over to Jake and clapped him on the shoulder. "We heard the call on the radio," he said, still grinning. "Some lady saying there's a wild animal on a roof. We knew it had to be Max." The other 2 nodded, chuckling. One of them, a guy with a big beard, looked up at Max and whistled. "Come on down, buddy," he called. Max wagged his tail even harder and slid down the ramp Jake had built, landing in the yard with a big thump. The kids clapped and ran over to pet him. Max licked their faces, happy as can be. Karen just stood there, frozen. Her plan had backfired big time. She'd wanted to make Jake look bad, but now she looked silly. The neighbors started talking louder. "Jake's a firefighter," one lady whispered. "And Max is a mascot? That's so cool," a kid shouted. Old Mr. Thompson laughed from his porch and said, "Well, I'll be darned." Everyone was smiling, everyone except Karen. She clutched her clipboard tighter, her face so red it looked like a tomato. Jake didn't rub it in. He didn't say, "Ha, I got you," or anything mean. He just looked at his crew and said, "Thanks for coming, guys." Then he turned to Karen, still calm, and said, "Max howls to help us. It's his job." The firefighters nodded. "Yep," the bearded one said. "Last month, Max howled when a kid got stuck in a tree. We got there fast because of him." The tall one added, "He saved more people than you'd believe." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She didn't know what to say. She'd called 911 on a hero, and not just any hero, but Jake, the guy she'd been picking on for weeks. The help she wanted was already here, and they were Jake's best buddies. The firefighters weren't mad at him, they were proud of him. And Max? He was their star. The twist was perfect. Karen thought she was the smart one, but Jake and Max turned out to be the real winners. Think about it, Karen's big move calling 911 was supposed to ruin Jake. Instead, it made him look awesome. The sirens didn't bring trouble, they brought the truth. Jake wasn't some pushover with a noisy dog. He was a firefighter, a guy who ran into burning buildings to save people. And Max was his partner, a dog who helped him do it. The neighbors couldn't believe it. They'd been watching this fight between Karen and Jake, and now they saw who Jake really was. Alright, let's wrap up this wild day on Oak Street. After the big reveal, the firefighters didn't waste any time. They climbed up Jake's little ramp, their big boots thumping on the wood. "Come on, Max," one called, and Max wagged his tail like crazy. He slid down to them, happy as ever, and they helped him hop off the roof. The kids cheered and clapped, crowding around to pet him. Max licked their hands, his tongue flopping out like a big wet mop. Then the firefighters turned to Karen. The tall one, still smiling, looked right at her and said, "Lady, this dog saved more lives than you'll ever know." His voice was loud but not mean, just strong. "Maybe leave Jake alone." The bearded firefighter nodded and added, "Yeah, Max is a hero. You should be proud he's here." Karen's face, already red, got even redder. She didn't know what to say. She just stood there, holding her clipboard, looking small and quiet for once. The neighbors had been watching everything from their windows and porches. When the firefighters said that about Max, they started clapping loud. Old Mr. Thompson banged his cane on his porch and yelled, "Good job, Jake." Kids jumped up and down, shouting, "Max is awesome." Even the lady who'd whispered about Jake before was smiling now. Karen mumbled something under her breath nobody could hear what and turned around. She slinked back to her house, her shoulders down, her clipboard hanging loose in her hand. She didn't look like the boss anymore. Jake didn't cheer or brag. He didn't say anything mean about Karen. He just patted Max on the head and said, "Good boy." Then he looked at his firefighter buddies and said, "Thanks for coming, guys." They laughed and waved it off. "Anytime, Jake," the tall one said. "Max keeps us on our toes." They climbed back into their big red fire truck, honked the horn once for fun, and drove off, leaving the street buzzing with excitement. Word spread fast, like, really fast. By the next day, everyone on Oak Street knew the truth. Jake wasn't just some guy with a loud dog. He was a firefighter, a real hero who helped people every day. And Max? He was a hero, too, trained to howl for emergencies. The neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. "I can't believe it," one lady said while watering her flowers. "Jake's so cool," a kid told his friends. Karen's mean notes and complaints didn't matter anymore. Nobody listened to her now. The next HOA meeting was a big deal. Karen showed up with her clipboard, ready to boss everyone around like always. But this time, things were different. When she tried to make new rules like no dogs on roofs or no loud trucks, nobody agreed. "Jake's a firefighter," one neighbor said. "He's fine." Another added, "Max is the best dog ever." People even cheered for Jake right there in the meeting. Karen sat down, quiet, her rules ignored. She wasn't in charge anymore. Jake and Max? They became the street's new favorites. Kids drew pictures of Max and taped them to Jake's door. Neighbors waved every time they saw him walking Max. Nobody dared mess with them again, not after that day. Karen stayed in her house more, her clipboard nowhere in sight. It was sweet, right? Jake didn't have to fight or yell. He just let the truth come out, and that was enough. Justice was served, and it felt so good. Okay, let's finish the story with something to think about, something that sticks with you long after the sirens fade away. Here's the thing, sometimes the people or even dogs you think don't belong are the ones who surprise you the most. Think about Jake and Max. At first, Karen saw them and decided they were trouble. She thought Jake was just some guy with a loud dog, someone she could boss around. She judged them too quick. Max barked a lot, and Jake didn't fight back, so she figured they didn't fit on her perfect little street. But oh boy, was she wrong. Jake didn't yell or get mad. He didn't try to prove anything to Karen. He just kept his cool, day after day. He let her march around with her clipboard, writing notes and calling 911. He let her dig her own hole, deeper and deeper. And when the truth came out, when that fire truck rolled up and everyone saw who he really was, Jake came out on top. Not because he was loud or mean, but because he was smart and patient. Max, too. That goofy dog turned out to be a hero, howling to help people in trouble. Who would have guessed? That's the big lesson here. Sometimes, people look at you and think they know everything. Maybe they see your messy hair or hear you laugh too loud and decide you're not good enough. Maybe they judge you fast, like Karen did with Jake. But you don't have to fight them or prove them wrong right away. You can just smile, keep doing your thing, and let them figure it out the hard way. Because the quiet ones, the ones who don't brag or shout, they've got the best stories. And when the time's right, they get the biggest wins. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever met someone who thought they were better than you? Maybe a kid at school who made fun of your shoes, or a grown-up who said you couldn't do something. It stinks, right? But Jake shows us a cool way to handle it. He didn't let Karen's mean words stop him. He didn't pack up and leave Oak Street. He stayed, kept being nice, and waited. Then, when the firefighters showed up, everyone saw the real Jake and the real Max. Karen's jaw dropped, and Jake didn't even have to say, "I told you so." The truth did all the work for him. That's pretty inspiring, don't you think? You don't always need to be the loudest or the toughest to win. Sometimes, being yourself, staying calm and kind is enough. People might laugh or point at first, but if you keep going, they'll see who you really are. Like Jake and Max, you might have a secret talent or a big heart that surprises everyone. And when they figure it out, it feels awesome, not just for you, but for everyone who gets to cheer you on. So, next time someone judges you too quick, what can you do? Maybe take a deep breath, smile, and keep being you. Let them talk or complain. They'll find out soon enough that they were wrong. You don't need to prove anything right away. The best surprises come when people least expect them, just like Jake's fire truck rolling down the street. The quiet ones, the ones who don't show off. They're the ones with the power to change everything. What do you think about all this? Did Jake's comeback make you cheer? I bet it did. He turned a bad day into a great one, and Max helped him do it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you liked best. Did you love Max on the roof? Or the look on Karen's face when the firefighters showed up? Maybe you've got your own story about surprising someone who judged you. I'd love to hear it. And if you had fun with this tale, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories like this coming your way. Cool stuff about regular people and dogs who turn out to be amazing. See you next time, friends. Keep being awesome, just like Jake and Max.